A woman fights for her life in a hospital bed, while her husband slips a ring onto another woman's finger on live television, thinking no one will ever know. But the moment those monitors flatlined and the wedding cameras kept rolling, a city woke up. This is not just a story about betrayal or cruelty. It is the moment a mother who nearly died giving birth to 3 premature babies becomes the one person powerful enough to bring a millionaire CEO to his knees. What happens next is a collision of lies, exposure, and the kind of justice that hits harder than anyone expects. And trust me, you will not see the final turn coming until we get into it. Tell us what time you are listening and where you are tuning in from. Drop a comment. We would love to hear from you. The hospital hallway was a blur of rushing footsteps, clipped orders, and the sharp squeal of a gurney wheel that needed oiling. Inside the maternity emergency room, the chaos was even louder. Nurses moved quickly around the bed where Laia Martinez Langston lay struggling to breathe. Her belly, swollen from carrying 7-month-old triplets, tightened again with another brutal contraction that ripped through her body like a blade. Sweat drenched her temples. Her fingers clutched the thin blanket beneath her, as if it were the last solid thing she could hold on to in a world spinning out of control. The monitor beside her bed beeped in a frantic rhythm. The lines spiked, dipped, and spiked again. Red warnings flashed on the screen, marking both her heartbeat and the fragile heartbeats of the babies inside her. One nurse leaned close, her voice trying to sound calm but cracking at the edges. "Stay with us, sweetheart. Breathe for me. Slow breaths. We're right here." But no amount of comfort could stop the terrifying truth. Laia had come in alone. There was no husband gripping her hand, no family waiting outside, no one but the medical staff who were fighting against time. Every contraction made her vision blur, every breath felt stolen. She tried to speak but only managed a thin whisper. The room swayed, her pulse pounded in her ears. Across from her bed, the television remained on. It had been left playing since she arrived. At first it was background noise, something she hardly noticed amid the beeping alarms and the tireless movements of the nurses. But then the picture on the screen flickered and changed. The channel cut to a live broadcast. The lighting shifted to bright gold. A string quartet played softly. Rows of guests dressed in shimmering gowns and designer tuxedos filled a grand hall decorated with towers of white roses. A wedding. A very expensive wedding. A nurse reached to turn the TV off, but Laia lifted a shaking hand. "Wait," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Something about the scene tugged at her. She forced her eyes to focus. Her breath hitched. The camera panned toward the altar. And there he was, Edward Langston, her husband, standing tall in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. And beside him, smiling as if the world belonged to her, was Vanessa Cruz, the woman whose name had haunted Laia's nightmares for weeks. Vanessa's gown sparkled under the chandeliers, her fingers intertwined with Edward's as if they were already tied by fate. Laia blinked hard, refusing to believe what she saw. The monitor beeped faster with every second she stared at the screen. Her heart slammed against her ribs, her stomach clenched. Not from contractions this time, but from a panic so sharp it made her chest ache. The wedding guests laughed together. Confetti cannons fired delicate streaks of silver into the air. Cameras flashed. Someone shouted, "This is the wedding of the year!" A wave of dizziness washed over Laia. Her hands flew to her belly as another contraction crushed her. Her body curled forward from the pain. The nurse closest to her shouted, "Doctor, she's losing stability!" Dr. Patel rushed in, snapping on gloves as he reached her side. "She is bleeding too fast. Her pressure is dropping. Move." His voice was loud enough to cut through the panic, but steady enough to hold the room together. Laia tried to keep her eyes on the television, even as her vision darkened around the edges. She watched Edward smile. She watched Vanessa laugh with triumph in her eyes. She watched the man who vowed to love her for life slide a ring onto another woman's finger. Her own cry caught in her throat. The monitor beside her flashed brighter red. Alarms blared. Nurses moved faster. But on the screen, everything was slow, soft, beautiful, cruel. The minister lifted his hand. "Do you, Edward Langston, take Vanessa Cruz?" Laia inhaled sharply. Her chest stung with every breath. She felt something warm spread beneath her on the sheets. The nurse checked quickly and gasped, "Doctor, She's losing more blood. Another contraction seized her body. She tore her gaze away from the doctor and turned to the TV again, desperate. Desperate to know if Edward would really do it. And he did. Edward smiled, a smile she once believed was honest. "I do. You." The chapel erupted in applause. At the same moment, Leia's body gave out. The contraction held her captive, twisting her insides like a fist. Dr. Patel lifted his head. "Her pressure is crashing. Move now!" The nurse pressed a hand to Leia's forehead, trying to wipe away the sweat. "Stay with us, honey! Look at me! Look at me!" But Leia's gaze drifted back to the TV. The image blurred. Tears welled in her eyes, falling silently onto the pillow. On the screen, Edward leaned forward and kissed Vanessa. Their guests rose to their feet, cheering so loudly it echoed through the hospital room's weak speakers. Leia's chest tightened. The monitor's red lights pulsed wildly. She gasped once. Then again, her vision clouded completely for a moment. The minister on the screen raised his microphone. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Thunderous applause filled the room. At that exact second, Leia's world collapsed. Her eyes rolled back. Her body went limp. The monitor shrieked. The red line spiked once, twice, then plunged downward. Dr. Patel shouted, "She is losing consciousness. Get the crash cart in here now." The nurses scrambled. The television kept playing the celebration as if mocking her. The red line on the monitor flickered, and then it stretched into a long, terrifying straight line. A single sound filled the room. Beep, beep, beep. The story turned in one brutal instant. Everything that followed would begin from that single line on the monitor, cutting through the room and through her fate. Before the hospital room and the flashing red alarms, there had been a very different world. Leia Martinez Langston once lived inside a story she believed would last a lifetime. It began years earlier when she was 19, exhausted from double shifts at a small diner just outside the city. She was clearing tables late one evening when a stranger paused by the counter and watched her with quiet attention. He was not yet the multi-millionaire the world would come to know. He was simply Edward, a young man in a wrinkled dress shirt who looked as worn out as she felt. He returned the next day, and the day after that. Each time, he greeted her with a gentle smile and left a tip generous enough to ease the worry that clung to her shoulders. He never acted superior or impatient. Instead, he spoke softly, asked if she had eaten, and complimented the way she remembered every regular customer by name. It was his gentleness that broke through the heavy fog she had lived in since her mother passed away. Grief had swallowed her whole, and she had been struggling alone. Edward pulled her back into the light. When her emotions cracked and she could no longer hide the loss she carried, Edward sat outside the diner with her long after closing time. He listened without interrupting, handing her a napkin when tears spilled from her eyes. He told her she did not have to face everything by herself. She believed him, and for the first time in months, she felt that the world had not completely abandoned her. Their relationship grew from those quiet nights. Months later, he knelt in the tiny backyard of her rented room. The porch light flickered above them, and the grass was wet with evening dew. He did not bring a photographer or a crowd. He held out a simple silver ring that cost far less than the diamonds he would one day afford. Leia cried from pure joy, believing that this moment was proof that love could rebuild everything she had lost. She said yes before he even finished the question. The early days of their marriage were gentle. Edward woke her with warm coffee and drove her to the grocery store because she did not yet have her license. He cooked dinner when she returned, tired from work. They spent evenings sharing ideas about a future home and future children. He bought her a second-hand bookshelf and filled it with books because she once mentioned wanting to finish school. When she fell asleep on the couch, he carried her to bed without waking her. Those months felt like stepping inside a beautiful dream. When Leia finally told him she was pregnant, Edward wrapped his arms around her and spun her in a slow circle across their kitchen floor. He kissed her forehead and pressed his palm against her small growing belly every morning after that. He talked to the baby before leaving for work, promising that he would be the best father he could possibly be. Leia believed every word. She thought motherhood would bring them even closer. But things began to shift once Edward's business started expanding. He was promoted, then promoted again, and soon he returned home later and later. The man who once planned picnics now canceled dinner without warning. Work dinners, conferences, networking parties, and company galas filled his schedule. He claimed it was only temporary and that he needed to seize opportunities he had never had before. Leia nodded and smiled, reassuring herself that success sometimes required sacrifice. Still, she felt the distance growing. She waited for him on the couch until her eyelids dropped, but he often came home long after midnight. When he did, he went straight to the shower and then to bed without much conversation. The warmth he once gave her freely seemed to fade into something cooler and harder to reach. Leia tried to ignore the ache in her chest. She told herself he loved her. She told herself he was simply tired. During her pregnancy checkups, he missed more appointments than he attended. The day she learned she was carrying triplets, she sat alone in the ultrasound room clutching the printed images. She called Edward immediately, breathless with excitement, but he did not answer. An hour later, he texted that he was in a meeting and would call her later. That call never came. When he came home late that night, he offered a quick apology, kissed her cheek, and disappeared into his office. Leia tried to understand. He had always wanted children, but the news of 3 babies at once clearly overwhelmed him. She wondered if he needed time. She convinced herself that everything would settle once the babies were born, but a seed of doubt began growing quietly inside her. The marriage no longer felt like the soft place it had once been. The house became filled with long silences that echoed through the hallways, replacing the late-night conversations they once shared. She felt him slipping away, not in a single moment, but in small, gradual steps that she was powerless to stop. She noticed the first lies because they were so small. He said he would be at the office, but she later saw photos of him at a charity event. He said he worked late, yet she found expensive cologne on his shirts that she had never smelled before. There were unexplained receipts in his pockets, dinners for 2 at upscale restaurants she had never visited. Each discovery tightened her chest a little more. Still, she forced herself to breathe. She told herself she was imagining things. She loved him. She trusted him. She had to. But the silence in their home grew heavier, and Edward's smiles became rarer. He spoke to her less, checked his phone more, and avoided her gaze when she asked gentle questions. Leia walked through each day with a growing sense of unease. She held her belly with both hands and whispered to her unborn babies that everything would be all right. She had no idea that the truth would break her heart far more violently than any suspicion. One night, when rain pattered softly against the windows and she walked down the hallway with a blanket draped over her shoulders, she noticed that Edward's office door was slightly open. Her breath caught. She stepped closer, and the moment she heard the voices inside, her entire world shifted toward the darkness waiting ahead. The door stood open just enough for her to hear the words that would fracture her heart beyond repair. The house was quiet when Leia walked through the hallway that night, one hand pressed gently against her belly. The earlier warmth of their home had faded long ago, replaced by a stillness that made every sound feel strange. She paused when she noticed a faint glow slipping from the crack under Edward's office door. He rarely stayed in that room at this hour. A soft murmur drifted through, barely audible at first. She took a step closer and pressed her ear toward the opening. It was Edward's voice, lowered to a whisper. His tone was tender, but not in the way he once spoke to her. It was the polished softness of someone trying to charm, someone trying to win. She held her breath, waiting for more. Her heart squeezed painfully when his next words floated through the narrow opening. "She is only the past. My future is with you." The sentence struck her so hard she almost backed away from the door. Her throat tightened. Her fingers trembled against the wooden frame. She tried to convince herself she had misheard, but then another voice answered him. A woman's voice, light, confident, familiar, Vanessa Cruz. Leia recognized it instantly. She had heard it once at a corporate gala, and felt something in her sink even then. The realization spread through her chest like ice. She pushed the door open just enough to see inside. Her eyes darted to Edward's desk. A small velvet box lay at the center, the lid slightly open. She stepped forward, drawn helplessly toward it. Her hand shook as she lifted the lid. Inside was a diamond ring that sparkled even in the dim lamplight. It was beautiful. It was expensive. It was not hers. Her vision blurred. She set the box down with a soft thud, then stared at the rest of the items scattered across the desk. A thick binder detailed the decoration plans for a luxurious wedding ceremony. Another folder held seating charts filled with names she recognized from Edward's high-profile circle. Her own name was nowhere on the pages. Instead, Vanessa's initials were printed beside the bride's roll. VC. There were plane tickets, too. She picked them up with trembling hands. 2 seats to a private island resort. The names printed were Edward Langston and Vanessa Cruz. She blinked at the tickets, hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something else. They did not. A wave of nausea rolled through her. She stumbled back as the door swung open farther, and Edward finally noticed her. His expression froze when he saw what she was holding. "What are you doing in here?" he asked sharply, as if she were the one intruding on his life, not the wife who shared his home. Leah raised the ring box, her voice cracking. "Edward, what is this?" He exhaled in annoyance. "It is exactly what you think." Her heart pounded so hard she felt it in her throat. "You are marrying her?" Edward did not flinch. "I choose her." The room tilted around her. She gripped the edge of the desk to steady herself. Her breathing grew unsteady, shallow. "Edward, I am your wife. I am carrying your children." He looked at her the way someone might look at a stranger interrupting their plans. "That does not change anything." Pain stabbed through her belly, but she kept standing. "We can fix this," she whispered. "Please, do not do this. Think of the babies." "Hugo." His jaw tightened. "I cannot build a future with someone so weak, someone who holds me back." The words cut through her like a blade. She tried to swallow, but her throat was too tight. Before she could speak again, footsteps echoed behind Edward. Vanessa stepped into the room, her lips curved in a slow, victorious smile. She looked as if she had been waiting for this moment. Vanessa rested her hand lightly on Edward's arm. "She should understand her place," she said softly. Leah's knees wobbled. She felt the air leave her lungs. Her whole body trembled as she tried to stay upright. "Edward," she whispered, "please, do not do this to our family." Edward's expression hardened further. "Our marriage is over. I want a divorce." Leah let out a sound that was neither a cry nor a breath. It was something raw, something wounded. "You want to divorce me now? When I am this far along? When I am carrying your 3 babies? You being pregnant is not a reason to stay," he replied coldly. "It is another reason to walk away." She stared at him in disbelief. "I loved you," she said, each word breaking. "I stood by you when you had nothing." "You should not have," he responded without remorse. Vanessa smiled. "It is time to go, Edward." He nodded. They turned their backs on her. No hesitation, no pause, no guilt. They walked out together, leaving the office door wide open behind them. The sound of their footsteps faded down the hallway until there was nothing left but silence. Leah remained standing in the middle of the room, staring at the empty doorway. Her hands moved instinctively to her belly, as if holding her children closer might ease the crushing pressure in her chest. Her breath shook, her heart felt hollow. She lowered herself onto the chair beside the desk when her legs finally gave out. She looked at the ring box again. The diamond inside glittered under the lamp, cold and cruel, a piece meant for someone else, a future built without her. Tears slipped down her face, landing on her hands. She wiped them away quickly, but more followed. She pressed her palms to her eyelids, trying to stop her world from collapsing. But it was already too late. Edward had chosen his new life, and he had thrown her aside like she never mattered. The house felt unbearably large around her. Every inch echoed with the ache of abandonment. She stayed in the office for a long time, unable to move, unable to think of how everything had fallen apart so completely. She finally rose, holding her belly as another sharp discomfort pulsed through her. Her babies shifted, her body tightened, but she pushed the pain aside, unable to face anything except the reality that now surrounded her. And on the day her pain became unbearable, the only person she called did not answer. The pain came without warning. One moment, Leah was sitting on the edge of the bed trying to steady her breath after the argument that had ripped her heart open. The next, a sharp cramp twisted through her abdomen so violently that she gasped and grabbed the nightstand for support. A warm rush spread down her legs. Her vision blurred as she realized what it meant. Her water was leaking. She was only 7 months along. It was too early. Far too early. She fumbled for her phone with shaking hands. Another wave of pain ripped through her belly and forced her to crouch forward. Her breath came in shallow bursts. She pressed Edward's name and held the phone to her ear. Each ring felt like an eternity. When he finally answered, she cried out before she could stop herself. "Edward, please. I am in pain. Something is wrong. The babies. Something is happening." Her voice trembled, thin with fear. Edward's reply came cold and flat. "I am busy. Do not bother me." The words pierced her deeper than any contraction. She tried again, desperate. "Edward, please. I cannot breathe. It hurts so much. I think the babies are coming." Before he could respond, another voice cut in. "Vanessa." Her tone dripped with satisfaction. "Stop calling him. Today is our wedding day. Do not ruin it. Stay out of our lives." The line went dead. The silence that followed was heavier than the pain tearing through her body. Laya stared at the phone as if it might bring him back if she begged hard enough. But nothing happened. Another contraction nearly forced her to her knees. She folded over, both arms wrapped around her belly, as if holding her children closer would somehow protect them. A strangled cry escaped her throat as she sank onto the floor. There was no one to help her. No family nearby, no husband, no friend. Only the cold floor beneath her and the crushing reality that she was alone in the worst moment of her life. She wiped her tears with shaking fingers and forced herself to breathe through the pain. She needed to get to a hospital. She needed someone to save her babies. She dialed for a taxi because it was her only option. When the driver arrived, she clung to the railing as she descended the stairs one slow step at a time. Every movement sent a new stabbing spasm through her abdomen. The driver rushed toward her when he saw her struggling. "Ma'am, are you having the baby now?" His voice trembled with alarm. "I do not know," she whispered. "Please, I need the hospital." He hesitated, clearly terrified she would give birth in the back seat, but he reached out and helped her inside. He drove faster than the posted limits, checking the mirror repeatedly as Laya clutched her belly and whimpered through each contraction. Sweat ran down her temples. She pressed her head back, trying to stay conscious. When they reached the emergency entrance, she tried to stand, but her legs buckled beneath her. The driver shouted for help. A nurse rushed out with a wheelchair. Leia collapsed into it, gasping for air. Her vision pulsed in and out of focus as she was pushed into the bright hospital lights. Inside, Dr. Patel appeared almost instantly. He examined her quickly, his face tightening. "Her cervix is dilating. She is going into labor. Prep the operating room now." Laya's breathing quickened. Panic surged through her. "Doctor," she whispered, "is Edward coming? Did someone call him?" The nurses exchanged glances but said nothing. One placed a gentle hand on Laya's shoulder, but her silence was answer enough. Laya felt a sob rise in her chest. The pain of abandonment hurt almost as much as the contractions. Tears streamed down her cheeks as the medical team rushed around her. She tried to steady her breath. She knew that panic could harm the babies. She forced herself to inhale and exhale even as her body shook. She whispered to her children, telling them she was trying, telling them they had to hold on. The gurney jerked forward as they wheeled her towards surgery. The lights above her blurred together as she blinked through tears. The operating room doors swung open. The cold air hit her skin. Nurses moved quickly, adjusting monitors and lifting her onto the surgical table. Her hands trembled uncontrollably. She looked around, searching for something familiar. Someone who cared. Someone who would hold her hand and tell her she would survive this. But there was no one. Just doctors, just nurses, just the rising urgency in the room. Dr. Patel leaned toward her. "We are doing everything we can. Stay with us." She nodded weakly. A nurse squeezed her hand for reassurance. The bright surgical lights flickered on above her. The contraction hit again, harsher than before, stealing the breath from her lungs. Her whole body arched with the force of it. The metallic sound of surgical tools being prepared filled the room. The tension was suffocating. The anesthesiologist adjusted her mask. The beeping of the monitor quickened. Laya tried to focus on anything steady, anything calm. But all she could hear was her own heartbeat racing in terror and the soft hum of voices preparing for the emergency ahead. Her tears slid into her hairline as she whispered, "Please let my babies live." The room filled with motion, the smell of sterilized air, the coldness of the table, the glint of the scalpel as it was lifted into place. Her fear swallowed her whole. And somewhere far away, in a place filled with golden lights and music, another scene unfolded. She could not see it. She could not hear it, but it was happening at the exact same moment she fought for her life. And at that very moment, at the wedding ceremony, the groom stepped into the aisle holding another woman's hand. The bright surgical lights flickered on above Laya as the medical team moved around her with urgent speed. Her body trembled uncontrollably. The cold air of the operating room pressed against her skin, mixing with the sweat already forming along her temples. She tried to steady her breathing, but each contraction made her chest tighten. The anesthesiologist adjusted her mask, while nurses prepared the instruments. Dr. Patel stood at her side, his eyes focused and serious. "We need to begin," he said, more to the team than to her. A sharp sting traveled across her abdomen as the scalpel touched her skin. Then came the deeper pressure. The incision opened and warm blood spilled out faster than expected. A nurse gasped softly. Dr. Patel's voice sharpened. "Suction! Quickly! There is more blood than projected!" The suction device hummed loudly as the nurses worked. Leia felt the pressure in her stomach shift. Within seconds, Dr. Patel lifted the first baby from her womb. The tiny body was so small, almost weightless. The nurse caught the infant and immediately leaned close to assess the breathing. "One, very weak," the nurse whispered, counting each faint rise and fall of the baby's chest. The second baby came moments later. This one was even smaller. Its breaths were irregular, sharp, and spaced too far apart. Another nurse echoed the same dreadful words. "Very weak." Laya's heart twisted. She could not see her babies, but she could hear the panic in the room, the rushed footsteps, the clipped medical commands. The third baby was delivered, fragile as a feather. The nurse who caught him held him close to her ear and strained to hear a cry. "Almost none," she said, her voice breaking. "Very, very weak." Laya tried to lift her head, but her body felt like it was sinking into the table. The room began to blur as her blood continued to spill. A nurse pressed gauze to the incision while another grabbed the blood transfusion kit. "She is losing blood too quickly," Dr. Patel said. "Start the emergency transfusion." A needle pierced her arm. Cold liquid entered her vein. Her vision flickered. She swallowed, but her throat felt dry. "My babies," she whispered. "Are they breathing?" No one answered. They were too busy fighting to keep her alive. Her body grew heavier. Her lips parted in a faint struggle for air. She heard herself calling, though the sound was barely a whisper. "My babies! My babies!" Her head tilted to the side. She saw 3 incubators being prepared. Nurses hovered over her children, adjusting tubes, checking monitors, calling for more equipment. The sight blurred as darkness crept in from the edges of her vision. A voice rose above the noise. "Doctor, should we call the husband?" Dr. Patel did not hesitate. "He is at a wedding." The words cut deeper than the scalpel had. Even half-conscious, Laya heard them clearly. A tear slid from the corner of her eye. Her mouth trembled, and she let out a soft, broken cry. The pain in her chest spread like fire. Her pulse wavered. The monitor beside her flashed brighter red as her heartbeat grew erratic. The beeping quickened, skipping rhythms. A nurse leaned over her. "Stay with us. Stay awake." But Laya felt herself falling away. The room dimmed. The voices became echoes. Her limbs turned numb. The lights above her stretched into long streaks of white. She could no longer lift her eyelids. She could no longer feel her fingers. The darkness reached for her, warm and heavy. "She is crashing," a nurse shouted. "Doctor, her heart rate is unstable." Dr. Patel's voice snapped through the haze. "Get the defibrillator, now!" The crash cart rolled into place. Someone pulled open her gown and placed the pads onto her chest. Another nurse began chest compressions. Laya felt the pressure distantly, as if her body were somewhere far away. "Charge it," Dr. Patel ordered. The machine whined as it powered up. The tension in the room grew thick. No one breathed. The incubators hummed quietly in the background. The only fragile sign of life besides Laya's failing heartbeat. Laya drifted deeper. She felt herself sinking underwater, the sounds above fading into muffled vibrations. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the faint cry of one of her babies. It was thin and fragile, a small whimper of life. She reached for it in her mind, desperate to hold on to that sound, desperate not to let go. The darkness swallowed her. "Clear!" Dr. Patel shouted. A surge of electricity jolted through her body. Her back arched. The monitor beeped once, then faltered again. Nurses continued compressions. The tension in the room tightened further. The line quivered. The monitor wailed. Clear again. Another shock pulsed through her motionless body. A nurse held her breath. Another whispered a quiet plea. The whir of machines vibrated through the cold room as they fought to keep her heart beating. "Come on," Dr. Patel murmured. "Stay with us." Laya hovered in a space between consciousness and fading life. She could not see. She could not speak. She could only listen. Far away, she heard the soft crying of her children again, like echoes through a long tunnel. She reached toward the sound, not with her hands, but with whatever piece of herself remained awake. The darkness thickened, then everything went silent. Her body stilled as the medical team worked in frantic motion around her. The incubators glowed faintly on the other side of the room where her 3 fragile babies were being stabilized. The operating room hung on a knife's edge between life and loss. And in that moment, as Laya slipped deeper into unconsciousness, the world outside continued without her. A world she once belonged to. A world that had turned its back on her. And at that same moment, inside the wedding hall, applause erupted as the groom slid a ring onto his mistress's finger. The wedding hall glowed like a world untouched by pain. Golden lights shimmered from chandelier to marble floor, bouncing off crystal columns and illuminating the floral arches that stretched across the ceiling. Fireworks crackled outside the glass walls, showering the venue in sparkling reflections that danced across the guests' faces. Everything glittered. Everything sang with celebration. Everything belonged to people who believed the night was perfect. At the center of the spectacle, Edward Langston walked proudly with Vanessa Cruz on his arm. His steps were confident, polished, and steady, as if nothing in the world weighed on him. Vanessa lifted her chin with regal ease, her dress cascading around her like the gown of a queen. She smiled with the brightness of someone who believed she had conquered every obstacle in her path. Guests turned to watch them, their admiration filling the room with murmurs of approval. Photographers hurried to capture every angle. Camera flashes sparked like tiny explosions. Live streams buzzed across platforms as reporters narrated the event. "This is the wedding of the century," one commentator declared into her microphone. A love story written in gold. Not a single outlet mentioned the woman who still wore Edward's legal last name. Not one whispered about the wife he had abandoned. The truth was brushed aside, hidden beneath expensive lights and layers of celebration. As the ceremony began, Edward stood before the altar with a practiced expression of devotion. He held Vanessa's hands as if they were precious. The music swelled, notes drifting upward like warm smoke. He spoke his vows with a steady voice, promising loyalty and forever. Promises he once gave to another woman who now lay unconscious in a hospital bed. Vanessa turned slightly toward the nearest camera and smiled through happy tears that glimmered like jewels. "Today is the most important day of my life," she said, her voice carrying across both the hall and the live stream audiences. Applause rose from the guests. Crystal glasses lifted high, champagne foamed and sparkled beneath the lights. A group of reporters near the back exchanged quiet words. "I heard his ex-wife vanished," one whispered. "Some say she left without a trace," another added. "No one has seen her in ages," a third murmured. They spoke as if Laya had never existed, as if her disappearance was a minor rumor rather than a tragedy unfolding in a hospital miles away. Edward and Vanessa walked together toward the towering 10-tier wedding cake, a creation so tall it seemed to touch the lower chandelier. The cake was adorned with edible pearls and white rose petals. They lifted the silver knife together. With staged elegance, they sliced the first piece. Cameras burst with more flashes. Someone cheered loudly. Laughter rippled around the room. The master of ceremonies stepped forward, raising a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out with booming energy, "it is time for the moment you have all been waiting for. Kiss the bride." The crowd erupted in excitement. Vanessa turned toward Edward, her smile wide and triumphant. He leaned forward, closing the final inches between them. At the very same moment, a television in the dim recovery room of the hospital flickered and brightened. The screen displayed the exact scene unfolding at the wedding. The golden lights, the applause, the kiss about to happen. The broadcast illuminated the still face of Laya, who lay unconscious beneath tubes and monitors. Her chest rose only slightly with each shallow breath. Though she was not awake, the sound seeped into her fragile awareness. The cheering from the wedding traveled across the room like distant thunder. Her heartbeat fluttered, her eyelids twitched. Her body sensed something even if her mind could not place it. The applause from the wedding burst through the speakers as Edward and Vanessa's lips finally met. The celebration filled the hospital room in sharp, echoing tones. Laya's heartbeat stumbled. The monitor beside her beeped rapidly. The rhythm jumped, then staggered. A nurse walking past the doorway heard the pitch of the alarm change and rushed inside. "Her heart rate is dropping!" the nurse shouted. Laya's face tightened in a faint, pained reflex. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes, though she was lost in a haze between life and fading consciousness. Her pulse grew weaker. The monitor blinked an urgent red. "She is crashing," the nurse called out. "We need the team now." Medical staff rushed into the room, the air filled with commands and the rustle of urgent movement. The nurse pressed buttons on the wall, activating emergency alerts. The television continued broadcasting the wedding kiss, unaware that its sounds were colliding with a fight for life only feet away. Laya's heart gave one last uneven attempt to stabilize. Then it stopped. The monitor drew a long, flat line. A shrill alarm filled the room. The nurse grabbed the crash cart. Another pulled back the blankets. A doctor sprinted through the door as gloves snapped and equipment clattered. The last flash from the wedding kiss faded from the screen, just as the hospital room plunged into full emergency mode. The hospital alarms blared, and fate turned at that exact defining moment. The flat, continuous tone filled the operating room with a chilling finality. The monitor displayed a single, unbroken line, cutting across the screen in stark white. Everyone in the room froze for a breath, struck by the sound that signaled a heart no longer beating. The stillness lasted only a second before Dr. Patel snapped into motion. "Charging," he ordered. The defibrillator paddles pressed against Laya's chest. Her body jerked when the first shock coursed through her, but the monitor did not change. The line remained still. The room felt tighter. A nurse wiped tears with the back of her hand, but kept moving. "Again," Dr. Patel said. His voice was firm, even though his eyes revealed the urgency beneath. The second shock hit her with a sharp jolt. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, there it was. A weak, fragile spike flickered onto the screen. The line trembled. Another beat followed, barely visible but undeniably real. The entire room let out a faint gasp of hope. A soft voice whispered, "We have something." But while her body remained on the table, Laya drifted somewhere else entirely. A fog surrounded her, warm and strange. She felt weightless, as if floating in a place that did not belong to the hospital or to pain. Through the haze, she saw a familiar silhouette forming. It was a woman with gentle eyes and soft hands. Her mother, the mother she thought she had lost forever. "Mama?" Laya whispered, her voice sounding small in the quiet space. Her mother reached for her, cupping her face with warmth she had not felt in years. "My sweet girl," she said softly, "you cannot leave yet." Tears rolled down Laya's cheeks even though her body lay unconscious. "I am so tired," she said. "It hurts. I cannot fight anymore." Her mother's voice was tender but firm. "You have 3 little souls waiting for you. They need you. You cannot let go." Somewhere far away, in the real world she could no longer fully sense, her 3 newborns cried from inside their incubators. Their tiny voices echoed faintly through the operating room. The nurses heard it. The sound shook them. One nurse pressed down on Laya's chest, performing compressions while tears streamed down her face. "Come on," she pleaded through trembling breaths. "Your babies need you. Please stay with them." The beep on the monitor strengthened. It was still weak, still unsteady, but it was no longer fading. Dr. Patel watched the rhythm build with cautious hope. "Keep going," he ordered. "We are not losing her." The room moved with renewed determination. Another nurse checked the incubators, her voice cracking as she said, "They are crying again, all 3 of them." The timing felt unreal, as if the infants were calling to their mother across the thinning veil between life and death. The cries grew louder, tightening the throats of everyone in the room. Then the monitor spiked again. Then again. A steady beat emerged, fragile, uneven, but alive. "She is back," a nurse said, choking on her breath. "Her heart is beating." A wave of relief swept through the room. Shoulders sagged, hands trembled. For a moment, it felt as if the entire hospital inhaled at once. "Move her to the critical recovery unit," Dr. Patel instructed. She has survived the arrest, but she is far from stable. The team worked quickly. They cleaned her, lifted her carefully, and transferred her onto a rolling bed. The hallways blurred beside her as they rushed her through the hospital. Nurses whispered to one another in disbelief. The rumor spread faster than they could contain it. She died for almost a minute, and she came back. No, you do not understand. She came back right when the babies cried. By the time they reached the special recovery room, half the staff on the floor already knew something extraordinary had happened. Laya was placed gently onto the new bed. Her skin looked almost translucent, drained of color. Her eyelids did not budge. Her breathing was shallow but present. Every rise and fall of her chest felt like a miracle pulled from the edge. Dr. Patel checked her vitals again. "She is holding on," he said quietly. "It is a miracle she made it through." The machines hummed around her, encircling her like a fragile shield. Tubes lined her arms. The blanket was tucked tightly to keep her warm. She looked peaceful only because unconsciousness shielded her from the agony her body had endured. Outside her room, whispers intensified. Word traveled through the hallway like a spark, racing along dry grass. It reached the nurse's station. It reached the emergency bay. It reached the desk, where calls were being taken one after another. A phone rang sharply. A young nurse picked it up. "Street Helena Hospital. How may I help?" She froze. Her expression shifted instantly. Her eyes widened as if she had just been struck by something unexpected. She pressed a hand to the counter for balance. "Yes," she whispered into the phone. "She is alive. She made it." Other nurses turned to look at her. She lowered the phone slowly, still pale. "Someone wanted to know if she survived," she said. "I do not know who it was, but they needed to hear it." She turned her gaze toward Laya's room and spoke again, almost in disbelief. "She is still alive." That moment changed everything. Her survival transformed from a medical emergency into something larger, something explosive, something that could not stay contained inside the walls of a hospital. People in the hallway continued murmuring. "If she wakes up, the truth will come out. You can. What will her husband do when this gets out? Someone is going to pay for this." As the whispers grew, the weight of her survival tightened around the building like a storm ready to burst. Someone leaked the first fragment of information. Another repeated it, then another. The fuse had been lit. Within minutes, the news that she had died and come back to life began slipping past the hospital doors, moving toward a city that was not ready for what would follow. The explosion was coming. A young hospital employee stood frozen outside the critical care unit, her breath caught in her throat. She had witnessed everything. She had watched the monitors plunge into chaos. She had seen the medical team fight to bring Laya back. She had heard the whispers about the husband who never came. The weight of what she knew pressed hard against her chest until she couldn't keep it inside any longer. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone. She dialed a number she knew by heart. A journalist she trusted. Someone who once promised her, "If you ever see something that needs to be known, call me first." He answered with a casual tone. "Hello?" she whispered. "You need to hear this, right now. You won't believe what is happening here." 10 minutes later, a breaking news alert exploded across local channels. CEO abandons pregnant wife during emergency labor, marries mistress at the same time. The headline burned across every screen in bright red letters. Social media erupted within minutes. Thousands of users shared the headline before reading the full story. People posted outraged comments. Others demanded investigations. Within 15 minutes, the story became the #1 trending topic nationwide. News tickers scrolled non-stop on television screens. Talk show hosts interrupted their regular programs to discuss the shocking allegations revolving around Edward Langston. Reporters stitched clips together. On one side of the screen was the glamorous wedding, with Vanessa Cruz laughing under shimmering lights. On the other side, grainy footage from the hospital hallway showed doctors rushing into the operating room carrying defibrillators. The contrast ignited a wildfire of rage. "How can he do this?" viewers commented. "His wife is dying while he's cutting cake with someone else. He should be in prison." At the wedding venue, the atmosphere shifted. Guests sipped champagne, unaware at first, until the first whispers rippled through the hall. A reporter leaned toward another and muttered, "I heard his real wife is still alive." "Alive?" the other replied, eyes widening. But everyone said she disappeared. No, she's at the hospital, and she almost died. Their voices were low, but not low enough. Word began to travel. Eyes darted toward Edward and Vanessa. Conversations grew tense. Vanessa's smile faltered as a staff member rushed to her side, whispering breathlessly into her ear. She stiffened. "Edward!" she hissed, pulling him aside. "Something is happening. The media knows. They are saying this will destroy you." "What?" he snapped, turning sharply. Before she could answer, his phone rang. The name on the screen made his stomach drop. Melissa Grant, his assistant. He answered quickly. "Melissa, what is it?" Her voice came out in a rush. "Sir, it's your wife. She isn't dead." All color drained from Edward's face. He staggered back, gripping the nearest table for support. "What do you mean she isn't dead?" he demanded. "She went into cardiac arrest," Melissa continued. "But they revived her. She is in critical condition." Edward swore under his breath. Vanessa's face turned pale. "We need to leave," she whispered urgently. "Right now." Before he could respond, another alert buzzed through his phone. Then another. His company's investors had begun sending urgent emails. "Explain your involvement in this scandal immediately. Stock value dropping rapidly. Need clarification. This could destroy the brand." Edward's pulse hammered in his ears. He opened a financial app with shaking fingers and watched as the stock price of Langston Enterprise plummeted in real time. The once stable value was crashing, point by terrifying point. Outside the hotel, chaos erupted. Dozens of paparazzi gathered around the entrances, flashes firing like lightning. News vans screeched to a stop near the front doors. Reporters shoved microphones into the air. When Edward and Vanessa finally appeared in the doorway, trying to flee, the mob surged toward them. "Edward, is it true your wife almost died alone in the hospital? Did you abandon her for this wedding? Why were you celebrating while she was in emergency surgery? Is she really alive right now?" Edward's breath quickened. Vanessa clung to him, her knees trembling. A reporter pushed closer. "Do you deny abandoning a pregnant woman during labor?" Vanessa's face drained to ghost white. She had never imagined the wedding would become a battlefield. She clutched Edward's arm like a lifeline. "Edward," she whispered, shaking. "Everyone is filming this. We have to go." Edward looked around. Cameras everywhere, microphones, phones live streaming their every movement. Each second felt like a noose tightening around his life. He needed to get out. He needed to escape the wall of questions. He needed distance from the disaster he helped create. He shoved past the reporters, pulling Vanessa with him, trying desperately to reach the car waiting at the curb. Security struggled to hold back the growing crowd. It felt like the world had turned against him, and he had no idea that what waited for him would be far worse than flashing cameras or falling stock prices. He thought the mob, the reporters, the humiliation, the scandal was the worst thing the night could bring. He was wrong, dangerously wrong, because as he ran from the wedding hall, breath shallow, panic rising, the most terrifying truth of all was waiting for him at the hospital. Edward burst out of the wedding hall in a panic, shoving past startled guests who had no idea what was happening. Only minutes earlier he had been basking in the glow of flashing cameras and applause. Now he ran across the marble floor like a man fleeing a burning building. His vision blurred. His breath came in short, broken gasps. People called his name, but he did not hear them. His mind was spinning, suffocated by fear. Outside the venue, chaos erupted the moment he appeared. Reporters swarmed him like a hive of furious bees shaken open. Cameras flashed in his face. Microphones banged against his chest. Someone shouted a question so loudly it rang in his ears. "Is it true your wife almost died while you were cutting the wedding cake?" Another voice followed, even sharper. "Why did you abandon a pregnant woman in labor?" Edward tried to cover his face, but the lights were everywhere. The crowd grew thicker. He stumbled off the curb and nearly fell. Security pulled some reporters back, but they pushed forward again with renewed fury. His phone buzzed endlessly in his pocket. He grabbed it with shaking hands. Investor names filled the screen. Dozens of calls, dozens of messages, each more panicked than the last. "Explain the scandal immediately. We cannot protect you from this. Stock value is crashing." A new alert popped up. The live market chart flashed bright red. The stock of Langston Enterprise was in freefall. A line that had once climbed steadily now plunged straight downward. point after point, disappearing into the lowest values he had ever seen. The words on the analyst update struck him like a blow. Unstoppable decline. His stomach twisted. He felt the ground sway beneath him. A shrill voice cut through the noise behind him. Vanessa. She had followed him outside, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Her phone vibrated non-stop in her hand. "My sponsors are dropping me," she screamed. "Every single contract. They pulled my entire campaign. Do you hear me? Everything. Gone." He barely looked at her. The panic inside him grew like a crushing fist. She grabbed his arm, shaking him. "This is your fault," she shouted. "All of it. You should have told me she was still alive. You lied to me. You ruined everything." But it was not her rage that frightened him. It was the realization spreading cold and fast through his chest. If Laya survived, she could tell the world the truth. She could destroy him completely. Everything he had built, every facade he had polished, every ounce of his success would crumble. And for the first time, Edward understood what true fear felt like. He needed to get to the hospital. He needed to know exactly what she knew. He needed to get ahead of this before it ended his life. He pushed Vanessa's hands away and shoved his way through the reporters, sprinting toward the street. His driver barely had time to open the door before Edward threw himself inside. "Go!" he demanded. "Drive to Street Helena Hospital, now." The car sped across the city while his phone continued buzzing. News notifications filled the screen. CEO abandons pregnant wife during emergency labor. Triple newborn survive while mother fights for life. Wedding of the century turned into public outrage. Edward rubbed his face with both hands. His heart hammered violently against his ribs. Vanessa continued shouting at him in messages that he ignored. Every mile closer to the hospital tightened the dread around him. When the car pulled up to the front entrance, his breath caught in his throat. Reporters were already lined up outside the hospital. Cameras pointed at the doors. Police tape separated the press from the entrance. Officers stood guard, maintaining order as questions flew through the air. He stepped out, but immediately several reporters sprinted toward the barrier. "Edward, did you know your wife was in critical condition? Did you intend to abandon her? Are you ready to face charges?" Before he could move, an officer stepped in front of him. "Sir, you cannot enter this way. The critical care unit is restricted." "I am her husband," Edward insisted. "Let me through. I need to see her." The officer's eyes hardened. "You were identified as a person involved in a suspected endangerment case. You will wait until the detectives clear you." "You will." Edward's pulse quickened. He tried to push forward, but another guard blocked him. He looked past them into the hospital. He needed to get inside. He needed to see her. He needed to know how bad things were. He tried the side hallway. Blocked. He tried the emergency elevator. A nurse stopped him. "Sir, you cannot go in there." He ran along the hallway, desperate, until he reached a room surrounded by medical staff. Through the glass window, he froze. 3 small incubators stood side by side, glowing softly beneath the blue lights. Each held a newborn no larger than a pair of hands. Their tiny chests rose and fell with uneven breaths. Wires and tubes surrounded them like fragile shields. Edward pressed his hand to the glass. His mouth parted. His eyes widened. For the first time that night, he felt something other than panic. He felt shock. He felt fear. He felt guilt. They were his children, his blood, his responsibility. He had ignored every call for help. He had abandoned them before they ever opened their eyes. A nurse standing nearby noticed him. Her expression turned cold. "They fought to save them," she said quietly, "and she fought to stay alive for them." Edward's knees weakened. He backed away slowly, unable to process the moment. He had never imagined that seeing them would hit him like a physical blow. When he finally gathered enough breath to speak, his voice broke apart. "I need to see her. Please. Let me see my wife." Another nurse shook her head. "You cannot. Not yet." He swallowed hard. "Please, I have to see her. I have to talk to her." Her expression did not soften. "She is awake now." Edward froze. His heartbeat thudded in his ears. Awake. She was awake. The nurse continued, "And what she is about to say will change everything." Edward's mouth went dry. He looked down the hallway toward the critical care doors, where a light blinked above the entrance. He took a trembling step forward, because whatever waited behind that door would decide the rest of his life. and the woman inside was ready to end everything. Leah opened her eyes slowly, as if fighting through layers of darkness. Her chest rose with shallow breaths. Her body felt weak and fragile, yet something inside her had crystallized into an unshakable core. The soft lights of the recovery room glowed above her. Machines hummed in steady rhythms. She blinked, trying to fully return to the world she had almost left behind. When she finally focused, her expression settled into quiet determination. There was no fear in her gaze, only clarity. A knock sounded at the door. It opened hesitantly. Edward stepped inside, trembling. His shoulders sagged with exhaustion. His tie was crooked. His eyes were swollen and glassy. The man who entered was not the confident groom who had walked proudly down a wedding aisle hours ago. He looked like someone standing on the edge of ruin. "Leah," he whispered. She did not respond. Her fingers curled weakly over the blanket. Edward moved closer, reaching out as if trying to hold her hand. But she pulled her hand away with the little strength she had. The rejection struck him harder than any words. His breath faltered. He swallowed, searching for something to say. But she spoke first. Her voice was soft, yet steady. "Are you here for me?" she asked. "Or for your reputation?" He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The truth choked him before he could shape a lie. His silence filled the room like another confession. Her eyes darkened with sadness, then hardened. She turned her gaze toward the incubators near the wall. Inside, the 3 premature infants slept beneath glowing lights. Their tiny bodies rose and fell with fragile breaths. The sight anchored her. She straightened slightly. "I am not afraid of you anymore," she said. Edward flinched as if struck. Her calm, even tone shook him more than any shouting could. He took another step forward. But before he could speak again, the door opened and a woman entered. She wore a sharp black suit and carried a folder. It was the hospital's legal counsel. "I am here on behalf of Street Helena Hospital," she said. "Miss Langston, I will be assisting you with any statements or protections you request." Edward stiffened. "Why is she here? This is a private matter." The lawyer's expression did not change. "A mother nearly died. 3 premature infants are in critical care. This is no longer private." Reporters crowded outside the hallway, their silhouettes visible through the frosted glass window. Every few seconds a camera flash flickered. Rumors pulsed through the corridor like electricity. Edward noticed them and panicked. "Leah, listen to me. The media is out for blood. They do not understand what really happened. We need to issue a statement. You should sign something that clarifies this situation. It would protect both of us." Leah looked at him for a long moment. His desperation was clear. She could see the fear in his eyes, the fear of losing status, wealth, and the carefully crafted image he had protected for years. She could also see what he did not say. He needed her silence. "No," she said simply. He blinked. "Leah, do not do this. Think about the company. Think about how this will look." She shook her head. "I choose my children, not you, Lun." Her words echoed across the room, steady and final. Edward inhaled sharply, stunned by the quiet force of her refusal. Outside, footsteps approached. A police officer appeared at the doorway. "Mr. Langston, detectives are here for preliminary questioning. You will need to come with us." Edward's voice shook. "Questioning for what?" "Potential neglect of a pregnant woman in medical crisis," the officer replied. The air in the room tightened. Edward's face drained of color. He looked at Leah with something between fear and disbelief. "This cannot be happening," he muttered. But it was. Behind him, the hallway buzzed with reporters asking for updates. The commotion intensified when someone noticed Vanessa leaving through a side corridor with sunglasses covering her face and a jacket pulled over her head. She disappeared quickly, desperate to avoid cameras and the growing scandal. Her silence only fueled the firestorm. Back inside the room, Leah reached toward the incubators. A nurse gently placed each newborn in her arms, arranging them carefully so she could hold all 3 at once. Tears filled her eyes, but they were not tears of weakness. They were tears of relief, love, resolve. She looked down at her children, their tiny fingers curling instinctively around her own. "We will live differently," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "We will live better. I promise you that." The lawyer stepped closer. "Miss Langston, people are gathering outside. They want to know how you are. They want the truth." Leah nodded faintly. She understood what this moment meant. She understood the weight of surviving what she had survived. She understood that the city was watching, waiting, choosing sides. She looked toward the doorway where Edward stood frozen, surrounded by officers waiting to escort him away. Her expression did not hold anger, only certainty. For the first time since all of this began, the power in the room did not belong to him. It belonged to her. A hush fell over the room as her 3 infants tightened their tiny hands around her fingers. Their warm, fragile touch traveled straight through her chest, anchoring her deeply to the present. It was a beginning. It was a rebirth. It was a declaration. And it was unmistakably hers. And from the moment her 3 babies closed their hands around hers, the woman was no longer a victim but someone rising to reclaim the truth of her own life.